I want to thank our sponsor, George Washington University School of Business, as they've generously lent us this room and been supporting the forum for the year. And also I want to thank our moderator, Carol Van Cleve. She's lined up some great speakers and some experts on blockchain, and I think this will be an exciting event. And I'd like to call on Martha Clark to say a few words for us. Thanks, Martha.
Thank you, Matthew. My name is Martha Clark, and I'm president of Women in Housing and Finance, one of the sponsors of the event. For those of you who are not familiar with Women in Housing and Finance, or WHF, WHF was established in 1979 as one of Washington's premier nonpartisan organizations. WHF actively promotes the professional enrichment of its members while retaining a focus on the advancement of women in the fields of housing and financial services. WHF offers opportunities for career growth through education, networking, and professional development. Members and non-members can attend our monthly public policy lunches and special events, such as our annual congressional reception and our symposia, which last year was on fintech. Members can attend free off-the-record brown bag lunches and access the membership directory. Both members and non-members are invited to provide information about current professional opportunities. WHF will post them in the job bank on their website, and only members have access to the information. Our members are encouraged to pursue leadership opportunities within the organization. And if there are any students in the audience, we have a mentorship and young professional subcommittees and a student membership rate of only $65 a year. WHF also has a foundation which focuses on promoting financial empowerment. WHF members may take advantage of volunteer opportunities with our nonprofit partners. We have an upcoming public policy lunch on December 5th. Their speaker will be Dorothy Savarese, who will be speaking about fintech. Dorothy is the president of the American Bankers Association and the CEO and president of Cape Cod 5 Mutual Company, which is the parent company of Cape Cod 5 Cents Savings Bank. If you want more information, there are flyers outside on the table where you register, and there are also WHF membership applications. I would now like to turn to introducing our speaker and organizer for the event, Carol Van Cleve. Carol is a partner at Manat, Phelps & Phillips. A respected author and speaker, Carol Van Cleve provides legal and strategic advice to depository institutions, money services businesses, and other financial services companies, as well as fintech businesses and blockchain ventures. She advises on federal and state regulatory, compliance, and enforcement matters, including the Bank Secrecy Act, AML and OFAC compliance, consumer protection issues, privacy, data, cybersecurity, and state money transmitter licensing. Publicly traded companies, private equity funds, and other entities seek Carol's advice in matters involving emerging and alternative payments companies. She helps clients address legal and regulatory challenges, structure investments and transactions, undertake changes in control, and conduct due diligence. Her compliance practice focuses on helping companies understand the USA Patriot Act, BSA and OFAC regulations, and develop, review, and enhance BSA, AML, and OFAC compliance programs. She also assists clients in implementing automated BSA, AML compliance solutions, addressing enforcement actions, and preparing for BSA and CFPB regulatory examinations and independent compliance reviews. And with that, I'll ask Carol to come to the stage, and she can start her first panel.
Thank you, Martha. I didn't really want to belabor the bio. You have it in front of you. I would like to add, though, is that I had the privilege of being, I am a past president of Women in Housing and Finance, so for those of you in the audience who may be interested, it's a wonderful organization to get involved with, and I know personally I've made lifelong friends, and I think I've known Martha forever, it seems like. But welcome to everyone tonight. This is a little bit different in the community that I've been working in for the last several years. I have, like journey. I will relate to you that for those of us who've been involved and engrossed in that journey, sometimes we realize that the rest of the world hasn't quite caught up with us. So I'm getting out of my car in the garage below this building about 45 minutes ago, and I see two people getting out of a very large black SUV. One of them is in full military regalia, the other took a just average business suit. And the one in the business suit says, "Hi, are you a professor here? Are you going to teach a class?" And I said, "No, I'm going to moderate a program on blockchain technology." He goes, "What's that?" And so I tried in my 2 sentences or so, the true elevator speech, to explain what it was. And he then introduced himself, and he was the Undersecretary of the Department of the Army. And he didn't know what blockchain technology was, and he's invited me in to go talk to him about it. So some of our panelists today, I think I'm going to ask if you want to come join me in that conversation. But, so on that note, the first part of our program today is to talk about what blockchain technology is. What I will say to you is that it sort of got a black eye right out of the box, because the first use case, and this is the thing to remember, is the first use case of this technology was Bitcoin, or is Bitcoin. But we're moving incredibly rapidly beyond that use case, and what we're going to explore in after we talk about what blockchain is, we're going to talk about what those use cases are that are emerging out there and where we stand with them. And we're going to look at it from the perspective of the private sector, commercial enterprises, and then from the government perspective, and how it's changing the world of the government in terms of its own internal operations, and how it's interacting for those government agencies that have regulatory oversight, how it's affecting the regulatory oversight. And we're going to, I think, reserve for another program, because at that point, we're probably going to be reaching that time that if you haven't refilled your glass with some wine or beer, you're probably going to want to. And so we'll save public policy really for another day, except as we may touch upon those issues as we go through. But I'd like to invite our first set of panelists up, and you're going to see this is sort of a rotating group of people as we go through the evening. So I'll come up, Jonathan, Alan, Kyle, Gary, Daryl, come on up. Is there anybody I'm missing out there? I think I've got everyone. And do we have, I think we have just one more chair, or do you have enough? Okay, what I'd like to do is first ask, well, I'm trying to decide whether it's best to start out asking each one of them for what their idea is, to describe what the blockchain is to them. Or shall I have them introduce themselves first? If I have you introduce yourselves first, you might give away what your perspectives are on blockchain. So let's start with the question of blockchain, and then after we do that, we're going to swing back and tell you who all these people are. So Daryl, why don't would you like to start first? And Daryl, I will say this before he explains anything more about himself, is Daryl's been a very active person in the local Bitcoin community. He has been the guy on the front line for the last, 4 or 5 years now? 2010, organizing local meetups and really generating the interest in this area. So Daryl.
Hey, thanks, Carol. That's great. Yeah, so I'm Daryl Duane. I'm an engineer by training and a geek and a techie, and super fascinated by Bitcoin and blockchain. Yeah, I've been in the field for a number of years now and seen a lot of changes. But I'm currently working in the identity space. Got a startup around blockchain and identity, and using these other technologies to work with that.
And how would you define blockchain?
Blockchain is an immutable record of activity, and that makes it very useful for recording financial activity, but there's plenty of other pieces of information that we want to record immutably. And the nice thing here is that you can have a lot of different actors with and they can be the most nefarious actors, and they can be the most trusted actors. Doesn't matter. It levels the playing field and lets everybody trust one another in some brilliant ways.
Derek?
All right. Derek Tiffany. I'm a technology manager at a local company, provides product as a service. I'll quote someone famous and say I build things. That's what I do. I'll define blockchain as a distributed ledger where in a consensus model is built into that ledger. That's I think, my definition of a blockchain.
Tone?
Hi everyone, my name is Tony Bass. I was a former Wall Street guy. I worked, I'm drove up here from New York. That's where I worked the last 10 years. And I got into the space later, probably early 2013, so I'm impressed you've been in it since 2010. I knew about Bitcoin earlier than that, but that's when I got involved. So to me, a blockchain is what Satoshi Nakamoto created with Bitcoin, and it's the proof of work mining algorithm, which allows something like the immutable transaction and a transaction ledger. But the security of it is created by the competitive nature of burning electricity for security. And the reward is in the form of Bitcoin. Now there are other competitive blockchains, but I separate that from a distributed ledger. To me, a distributed ledger is closer to a database than a blockchain, which I think is something like Bitcoin that is used for a message of value that is being transferred.
Alan?
All right, thank you. I'm glad no one's given my answer yet. So I'd like to emphasize something that's not often appreciated or discussed in terms of blockchains, but it is actually at the core of what a blockchain does, and that is a blockchain is a very powerful new way of keeping databases synchronized. And that is to say, a blockchain is not itself a database, it is just a sequence of information. It could be transactions, it could be government records, it could be sensor data, any kind of information. It's in the blockchain, but in order for it to be useful, that information has to be put into a database where it's indexed, it can be searched rapidly. So for example, if a transaction comes in, you're gonna have to look up the account, the balance in the account, the authorization, and then if the transaction is approved, you're gonna have to update the data in the database with the new balance. So there is some kind of database behind every blockchain application. And what the blockchain is doing for you is it is keeping these databases in sync so that if everyone receives the same blockchain and they process it in the same way, they all have synchronized databases. However, and this is what's new and very powerful, the blockchain is meant to be collaborative. So instead of just traditional ways of synchronizing databases would be master-slave, this is multi-master where everyone can collaborate, and that opens up new models of managing your information where you can have multiple organizations responsible for managing the updates. You can have a collaborative governance process around that. It's more robust, it's more hacker-proof. There's a lot of value that gets added just from keeping databases synchronized in this new method.
Jonathan?
Thanks. A blockchain is and this might come as a surprise to some people, is a chain of blocks of data. Essentially those blocks are chained together using some sort of cryptographic primitive. In Bitcoin, that's done through a hash function. Essentially it's a way of making sure that data that was put into this data structure previously refers to any new data that's coming in refers backwards to prior data that's inside of it, and so adjusting any sort of historical data will change how people can view and see all the historical data, so you can see very quickly that data has been tampered with. And so people like to think of it as something that is immutable. I would say that the blockchain also has a slightly other meaning, and I would say that it has sort of escaped definition on a technical level, is that it's also referred to as any sort of database technology that is inspired by Bitcoin. And a lot of good database technology will be inspired by actually kind of how Tone described it, which is looking at like a proof of work and a lot of like synchronized distributed databases that will be built on top of it, and a lot of those will be in common parlance referred to as blockchains, but maybe don't fit the exact definition, which is like a chain of blocks of data put together by cryptographic primitives.
Okay, so is everyone confused at this point? Or is it very clear to you? What we thought before I asked them to start to discuss these issues between them, first of all, I took notes here, and I have a dozen different terms that I've heard being used to describe this. But what we thought would be useful next is to turn to Kyle Burgess, who is with the Consumers Research Organization, and they have done some really interesting work in dealing with these issues, to give you a little bit of flavor of what this really means at the consumer level.
Can you hear me? Okay. I will add on to what our panelist said. I'm actually really mad that he took what I was going to say, which is, I think what Tone described as a blockchain is what a blockchain is. I think what you will come to know as a blockchain is what Michael described. You're going to know it as something very different, which the Bitcoin and digital currency purists are not going to agree with as blockchain. So I'm going to talk about what you're going to come to know, not maybe what the most technical definition of it is. There we go. So I will approach it from the consumer perspective, but obviously this works for business to business, this works for industries, it works for a lot of different things. But the way that the current financial landscape works is that as consumer Stacy, that's what I like to use for my screen names for all things social media. But as consumer Stacy's life works, right now she has to use an intermediary, whether that's her credit cards or the bank. Unless she's doing a cash transaction, she has to use an intermediary to make transactions happen. So she's shopping, she's going to the doctor, she's using Facebook to buy some shoes. Yes, the only female on the panel just made the generalization. Or, she's buying things for her home. Right now, this is the way the landscape works. What blockchain technologies does is enable us to move to direct payment for these things or direct interaction with these things. So I'm going to be approaching it from the payments perspective, but in the future, ideally, it could also be records. So looking at the hospital, you can use blockchain technology to manage records, not by putting them on the blockchain. That is something that I think everyone on the stage would be really opposed to, but permission to access things. So if you have a digital identity and you can grant permission through that digital identity to access things, then you no longer have to go through an intermediary to share information with your doctor. You can give your doctor temporary access to the information that doctor needs, and then you can take it back. So going from intermediary to disintermediated. These are some of the goals of the blockchain that we came up with for a paper that we did we started working on it in the summer of 2015, and it came out in January 2016. It's available on Consumers Research's website, so www.consumersresearch.org, white papers. But these are 5 of the goals that we came up with that kind of overarch kind of all of the goals. And so what we just talked about was blockchain 1.0, that top part, that is the protocol itself and using the digital currency as it was intended as a currency, a medium or a store of value, and transferring that value. 2.0 is something that I think is starting to take effect. It is using digital currencies and blockchain technologies for legal and kind of second tier levels of payments. And then 3.0 are some of the more interesting things that you're going to be hearing about in terms of what I just described with identity or health or other ways to use a distributed ledger to manage information, allow permission to that information, take permission away regarding that information. And so these are some consumer opportunities. I'm not going to go through them. I'll give you a second to read them. But this is a lot of what's in our paper, and we go through each of these opportunities and how these opportunities will. It's not just for consumers. There are a lot of government ones. I think Tone will probably touch on that because I think he thinks that's the most interesting use case for blockchain technology. And then this final one, I totally stole this from these guys because we do not have the manpower in-house to do that. But so this top bit, the laser is kind of hard to see. This is the financial use cases. There are wallets, person-to-person payments, remittances. These are all the traditional things that you've heard of, but they're doing them more efficiently. Banks take 3 days to settle payments. With Bitcoin, it's not only settling a payment, it is transferring the value immediately. If money leaves my bank account today and I transfer it to Carol, it's going to appear in her bank account 3 days later, and that I've lost value. For 3 days, it's in the ether, and then it appears in Carol's account 3 days later. But if I do that with Bitcoin, it happens immediately. The value leaves my wallet, and within 10 minutes of the settlement that takes place on the Bitcoin blockchain, it will appear in your wallet. And that's immediate, and that's meaningful, especially for something like remittances, where in a lot of developing countries, trust is a big problem. And so because this is open, the trust question kind of goes away. When you move down to the bottom though, the right side right here, this is the 2.0. These are different uses that are not the traditional financial, just payments and banking. Some of these use cases include smart contracts, so an automated contract where if, for example, I'm going to use something illegal because Bitcoin's already got a bad name, but if I make a bet with someone on a basketball game and we agree that my team's going to win by 5-point spread, I can make that into a smart contract, and it will self-execute, and in that contract the agreement will state that I'm going to put my money here, you're going to put your money there, we will have an arbiter that will execute that payment when I win or you win, or neither one of us wins and it goes back to us. And the source for the information will be, ESPN.com, right? When they post the scores, the smart contract will check the ESPN scores online, and if it is a win by 5 points, then I get the money, and if it's a loss by whatever other spread, they get the money, and if that doesn't happen, it automatically comes back. That's how a smart contract can work on like a very basic level, but it can get a lot more complicated, and maybe someone will talk about the DAO later on how smart contracts can go awry if they're not well coded or not well written. And then these bottom ones, this is 3.0. The Internet of Things. Literally, my laundry detergent or my dishwasher will be able to order more soap from Amazon, and I can just program that using something similar to a smart contract, and the blockchain will enable that. Their e-identity or digital identity, that is another concept that you'll hear about, where I will have a digital persona and it does not come from a government. It could potentially come from a government. But that is another kind of use case that you're going to be hearing a lot about the more that you look into this. And I personally think that that's kind of the linchpin for any of this to work beyond financial use cases. Without digital identity, all of the rest is really difficult to achieve. Legal, I kind of talked about smart contracts, but there's also things like notarization. That's incredibly arduous and bureaucratic task right now, but something like notarization can be easily automated, which is really great for a lot of people who have to work in that kind of stuff. Anything bureaucratic, really, and I really do hope, since I have to leave early, Tone will talk about government use cases. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is proof of ownership. There are a number of blockchain companies working on putting titles on a blockchain, not necessarily the Bitcoin blockchain, but on a blockchain. As you probably know, and we have this issue to some extent in the US, but in a lot of developing countries, land ownership titles or even street addresses are non-existent, much less ownership of those titles. So proof of ownership can be proof of ownership of a physical object, it can be proof of ownership of land, but by putting that in a blockchain, you can then see the ownership over time, and any attempts to change that ownership, if it is done off the blockchain, they're invalid, because every step of the way you've been able to monitor who, like the chain, it's simple because it's in the name. That's really all I have. The only thing I'll say at the end of this is kind of what I said at the beginning. A lot of these things are the blockchain that you will come to know, but they are not, I think, as Tone described, as the technical definition of blockchain, and I think that's really important to note, because Bitcoin itself, the coin, it has an underlying value, just like a fiat currency. It is worth something. And a lot of these blockchain use cases, they don't necessarily need the token that underlies the Bitcoin blockchain, and that kind of diminishes some of the value of the purpose behind this. So before diving in and trying to start a Bitcoin company or another distributed ledger company, just really think about whether or not you actually need a blockchain to do it, or do you just need a better system or a better integrated database or some more interoperable technology, because blockchain is starting to be the solution that everyone is looking to, but unless you really need it and unless you are really going to use it for that, underlying value that's associated with it, in something like we did talk about supply chain before, if you're going to do it for supply chain, you actually want to consider using that currency piece, not just the, the distributed ledger itself. That's all I've got.
That's a mouthful.
That's all? Are we allowed to keep that chart on? I know.
It's not mine. It belongs to those guys.
Kyle has to leave us because she's going to do hurricane cleanup.
Yeah, my mom's in South Carolina, and I'm gonna go help clean up.
So best of luck to you, and I guess if you were fully equipped, you could probably direct Bitcoin donations to the effort right now. Let me ask you, take a quick survey of the audience. How many of you own Bitcoin? The numbers are getting better all the time. How about some other form of cryptocurrency? Okay. And how many of you with tech companies that are looking at blockchain technology? Okay, and how about governmental agencies? Anyone? Okay, well, we have, yes, Martha, you're right, you're right at ground zero on a lot of these issues with the control of the currency, the regulator. Okay, guys, so now that Kyle has left the panel, I'm not even sure where we start with the issues. Tone, you're reaching for the microphone. So.
I would like to comment on a few things that Kyle said, which were pretty good. I really like that you did use, she used an example for a smart contract as like a betting or a gambling. And that is a major use case for Bitcoin. And that's because gambling is scrutinized in this country. Unless you're in Vegas or I guess a few other jurisdictions, it's very difficult for you to gamble, and people want to gamble. So they resort to a means of value transfer that the government doesn't control. I don't really see that. She also mentioned the 3-day settlement. I always looked at 3-day settlement or any kind of settlement, that's a regulatory problem. That's not a technological problem. I always tell people your email got to you within 3 seconds back in 1997. So could have your money. It's just numbers in a computer screen created by a programmer. There was nothing stopping your money from getting to you instantly, irreversibly, back in the 90s, other than regulatory compliance. So the only reason why Bitcoin can't do that, can't get around that, is because they don't care for the regulation. They get around it. It's a peer-to-peer value transfer. So that's how, and the word blockchain was created in that context. But the word was extrapolated into other things, which is like distributed databases. One quick comment on Internet of Things. It's great that your dishwasher can order detergent, but I don't know how trusted, how much trust you put in GE, which builds that dishwasher, on internet security. So these are like my optimistic things about Bitcoin, is that now in your computer there is value. So in other words, like reasons for attackers to attack the average person. Pre-Bitcoin, the only people that really cared about internet security was like nuclear power plants, electric grids, hospitals, banks. But now your own computer at home is a bank. So now your internet security at home needs to be as secure as like an electric grid. So this is where I see Bitcoin as like making a stride for like internet security to actually pick up, because anybody can be attacked, and people are trying to hijack your computer with a virus that locks it up and demands Bitcoin in order for you to get your files back, which is crypto lockers. I kind of see it as a positive, because it will force people to come up with better internet security. Because right now, I wouldn't want my refrigerator to have a connection to the internet. I don't know if I would trust that. So there's just a couple of things I wanted to mention off of the slide.
I did think one really good place All right, I juggle as well. One really good thing that was mentioned off the slide is that the blockchain is digitally probably the closest thing that we have to represent. There's a very famous example of exchanging an apple on a bench, right? So two untrusted parties never talk to each other. There's no third party, there's no bank involved, there's no one else involved. How do you represent two people exchanging an apple on a bench digitally? And the blockchain is probably what we have found the best thing that actually represents that, right? So you don't need to talk to a bank in order to exchange that apple or that dollar. That dollar or that apple can't be replicated, you can't duplicate it, you can't send it to someone else. So a lot of these things that are made possible here, and there is a lot of things, a lot of it comes down to that ability to represent a transaction between two untrusted parties without a third party intermediary. And the notion that blockchain is the ultimate unicorn, it's not the ultimate solution for everything. There's a couple of very good flow charts. Yes, they say basically, if you have a third party, if part of your business model is that you're going to have a third party that negotiates between these people, then you don't necessarily need a blockchain. Blockchain is a great tool when you have untrusted people that need to make transactions together.
Daryl, I know you're anxious to take the microphone, but I would like if you would give us just a sort of a minute primer for those who are totally uninitiated. Is how do I get Bitcoin in the first place? We're talking about the algorithm, we've talked about a reward, but let's say I'm not running the algorithm on my computer and getting the reward for running my computer. How do I get Bitcoin otherwise?
Great question. So who here doesn't have Bitcoin? Okay. And who here says they do have Bitcoin? Yeah. And on your phone? Okay. Everybody go find that person afterwards and have them show you where to download a wallet to your smartphone or to your PC. Mycelium is a nice wallet. There's a number of others out there. What's a good wallet for an iOS? Mbits? Airbits is a great wallet. There's a number of, these are free applications that you can run on your smartphone, or you can download the original Bitcoin wallet that's been updated quite a bit to your laptop, and you'll have a address that's a series of jumbled letters. It's a representation of a hashed public key, and that is that is your receiving address. If you can, and it's safe to give that address out to somebody else who will put it into their wallet and can send you just a little bit of Bitcoin. It's nice. Bitcoins are super divisible. Okay, pennies goes down to 2 decimal points, or dollars go down to 2 decimal points with pennies. We can go down to 8 decimal points with a Bitcoin. Can't quite send the smallest amount all the time because of some fees, and it costs more to send that smallest amount and call it Satoshi. But you still can send small amounts, and that will be a way to get your first Bitcoins, not a full Bitcoin at this point, because how much is a Bitcoin right now? 640, right? So probably not going to find anybody to give you one whole Bitcoin these days. If you don't have someone here to talk to afterwards, or you want to do it later on, there's a number of different exchanges. He's volunteering, I'm volunteering. Would love to get you going tonight. Yeah?
If I could ask a question. If you lose your address, lose your device.
Yes. Great question. There's no central party out there. There's no bank you can call up. There's no Bitcoin company. There's no building. There's no one to get it back for you. If you lose it, it's gone. Like using cash.
You can make backups,
and you
should, and store them in multiple locations. You can make multiple backups.
There's also an alternative called the hosted wallet.
Yeah.
Sort of helps.
Yeah, I don't really want to go there too much. You can. Sorry, Carol. That's a recipe for someone to take that potential money. There's a security risk. We've had hosted wallets.
Well, we have some companies that are regulated entities that are offering those products, like Circle and Coinbase. So
Those are great for small transactions. And yes, when you go to an exchange, when you go to a Circle, you go to Coinbase, these are all good exchanges that we want to talk about that you can get more Bitcoins from with cash, with dollars. You are going to have your Bitcoins in a hosted wallet for a period of time. I don't recommend you keep large sums of money, large sums of value in those places for very long. Instead, you want to find a way to make cold storage. You want to make a wallet that is not even, you want to come up with a pair, you want to come up with a storage place that's never even touched the internet, so that there's no way that a hacker can get to the place where they're able to take that private key and send the instructions out to the Bitcoin network to transfer those funds to their own wallet.
Jonathan, I can
Yeah,
see
I'm
your.
sorry, jumping over.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask you one more question about that wallet real quick?
Sure.
Because again, I'm somewhat of a newbie as well. But with regards to the wallet you have, I assume there's a user ID password you put in to get access to electronically to the
But,
wallet.
I mean, so there is, you can encrypt the wallet, yes. There is a password only that you can use to encrypt the wallet, and I recommend doing that
So no two-factor.
as well. Two-factor,
But it doesn't.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, but what about multi-sig?
You can
You can do multi-sig too.
Okay, so I think there's a lot of, okay,
Yeah,
let's,
I just wanted to add that.
let's like, I want to backtrack a little bit here. So basically the most common way for consumers to get to Bitcoin today, there's been about $1 billion of venture capital money put into startups that enhance the usability of Bitcoin the protocol. A lot of what we're talking about here is like Bitcoin the protocol. How the protocol works is that you have a private key, which is like a secret you can hear here. You have to keep very, very secret, because anyone who has that secret has your money. That is on the protocol layer. That's how Bitcoin works. There's been about $1 billion of venture capital money put into making both the security of that private key a lot easier. There are like secure hardware devices that you can buy as a consumer that will protect that private key that's never touched the internet, and that you can store more easily. There are lots of companies that allow you to put two-factor authentication on things that don't store your private keys or store encrypted versions of your private keys. There's also companies that actually will insure Bitcoins that you hold with them up to a certain amount, and a lot of those places are places where you can connect your bank account to actually buy Bitcoins from those services. So the really nice thing about Bitcoin is that at the protocol layer, it is a peer-to-peer network, and exactly as has been said on the panel, you can ultimately take all the responsibility you want for your own security. At the same time, Bitcoin is very flexible as a protocol because you can entrust your Bitcoin to anyone else. Now, obviously, as we've heard, there have been instances in the past where a lot of people have made off with your money because it was a Wild West economy. But also, like today, there are reputable businesses that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars in venture capital money, are regulated by the same financial regulators that regulate our existing financial services, that will ensure the security and safety of your Bitcoin if you put trust in them, or you put trust in the FDIC. So there is a full range of options, and I think.
I'm sorry, did you say the FDIC?
Yeah, Circle, you can hold money with Circle, and it's insured by the FDIC.
Oh, if you want to put cash into
Okay, yes.
fiat
yes.
currency
Not-
into an account, yes.
So some of them, yeah, okay.
They'll reimburse you the cash equivalent. They're not actually going to go and get you Bitcoin back if they
Oh,
went out of price.
no, let's, before we go too far on
Yeah,
this.
that's not-
no,
that's not-
the
okay.
FDIC
Does not insure Bitcoin.
is not insuring Bitcoin.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah. But the company itself has, like, for example, the facility similar to a PayPal equivalent style, where you can hold USD with Circle. That shows that they are like a reputable business that like is a regulated entity. They do not, the FDIC will not insure Bitcoin balances held at Circle. But Circle will probably have cybersecurity insurance that will insure at spot price your Bitcoin and will return the dollar value back to you. So that, I think that it's important to understand Bitcoin technology works on a protocol layer. We can talk about the technology itself and how it's been formed, but then there's a lot of people who built applications to make it a lot easier for consumers. The final thing, I just wanted to backtrack a little bit because I feel like we've jumped ahead a little bit on the what is Bitcoin. for people that are really uninitiated to the topic, it comes out of a movement of trying to disintermediate an intermediary for value transfer. We've kind of seen that on the slides. Historically, people in the financial cryptography community, people in this kind of how do we secure our financial systems, have been very interested in creating such a system. And in fact, research has been going on since the early 1980s on how do we create some sort of digital token that individuals can keep secure themselves. It wasn't until 2008 when a paper was released about how do you get rid of the server in the middle of all of this? How do you get rid of like a single party in the middle that you trust? And that was done through basically creating some sort of ledger where everyone can share the history of transactions that was not kept secure by any single party, but rather has a security model that's based on economic incentives and is distributed. And that's how Bitcoin was born. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins, some basic things. Every single Bitcoin transaction is public, so every transaction you make is broadcast to the network using these identifiers that we've been talking about as addresses. Essentially, the algorithm, the consensus algorithm, is just to ensure that anyone who's running a Bitcoin client or the Bitcoin software will all agree on the history of Bitcoin transactions, and that ensures that there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins, that no one can steal your Bitcoins without stealing your private key, your secret, will ensure that people can broadcast new transactions to the network.
Just a quick comment, like when the word private key is being used, and I know some people are probably not sure what that means, another way to think of a private key is a password that only you know, and whoever you share it with also has access to your private key. So it doesn't have to be a password, it could be like a long string of numbers, but it's basically something that only you know, that's what makes it private. And if you share it with other people, then it's as private as who you share it with. So that's another way to say private key.
What prevents, say, law enforcement or regulators from tracking packets of information, IP addresses, routers, other things that these localized scams, particularly the
So I guess your question is how anonymous is Bitcoin? As I said, Bitcoin is a system that works where you have Bitcoin addresses. And Bitcoin addresses you can generate on any device. So an example would be, I have a computer that's never touched the internet. I mean, technically I could even like generate a Bitcoin address like using pen and paper. It might take me a long time, but essentially you can generate a private public key pair, which is all you need to give someone an address to receive Bitcoin, completely off the internet. And then what you can do is you can, if you give it to me through some sort of secure channel, I can pay you, and then, or if like we meet up on some sort of street, I can send you Bitcoin, and only me and you know basically who that address belongs to. Now, if you start to transact on the Bitcoin network, yeah, if you sell the Bitcoin back to cash, you're using a venue, someone who can capture information about you. If you are broadcasting transactions onto the Bitcoin network, as you say correctly, you are going to leave electronic trace of transactions. You're also going to leave the public information of your Bitcoin address, sending money to some other Bitcoin address. And it's up to law enforcement or whoever out there to think to de-anonymize you, and there's strategies to do that, and there's strategies to keep yourself private. I would say that it's feasible to remain fairly anonymous on a very small scale basis, but if you are transacting on a large scale basis, it's a lot harder.
Alan, I know that you have been, we haven't really started talking about alternative currencies, but I know you've got a project where you've been looking to go to the extent we're trying to figure out how to look at and see into Bitcoin. You've got
I feel like
something
I'm
else
being
going on.
allowed a softball question here. Yeah, I'm currently the developer of a new cryptocurrency coming out that tries to be highly scalable, fast, and completely private. So even though transactions are posted to a public blockchain, they're all encrypted so that only the two parties on the ends of the transaction can understand the information posted to the blockchain. No one else has any idea what it says. All they can do is verify that it's valid. So there are technologies coming out to try to protect information on the blockchain. And
One way I would look at this, and I've been in and around these issues, not from a technical standpoint, but from a legal standpoint, is we're really in an arms race to a certain extent, is we're figuring out, if you go back to the Bank Secrecy Act, which was enacted by the federal government, or by Congress in 1970, it took us 40 years almost to really understand how to track cash. And now suddenly we have this electronic form of currency, and we're scrambling, and I know Jonathan can speak more about his company's efforts to track this new form of currency. But then we've got Alan sitting next to him, who is evolving the next generation that's going to be even more anonymous.
Hi, quick question. What does the space look like for an average full stack developer in terms of blockchain and Bitcoin? I've spent the better part of this year trying to make applications. I'm using Ethereum, which is very developer friendly. I'm also using Web3.js. So if you're like a regular developer, where should you look if you want to build user-facing applications that use the blockchain and Bitcoin?
I'm gonna pass the mic down. It's probably not a question for me. I think Ethereum is just a giant scam. So I'm probably not the best person to answer this question.
Hold on, so but you did give an answer in that is your answer you should just look at Bitcoin?
Okay, fine, I will answer the question. So, when Kyle brought up examples like real estate on the blockchain, these things make me cringe a little bit. Like when we talked about earlier, and someone said, well, what happens if you forget your password in your wallet? Do you lose your Bitcoin? And my answer is, well, if you didn't make a backup, then yes, you will lose your Bitcoin. Now, this might be a new concept to some, but my email actually works the same way. If I forget the password to my email, I will never access my own email again. I clearly don't use Yahoo. And this is the new world. If you don't want others to know what you're doing, you have to be responsible for your own security. I'm getting there. So because of that, you really gotta think about why do you really need a blockchain? And for me, a blockchain is something like, if you put real estate on a blockchain, well, what if you send your title to the wrong person? Do they now get to keep the house? If your answer is no, then blockchain is not for you. If you want something that, like, for example, if you're building something that needs to be changed, like whatever stack you're doing and you think you're building a blockchain, and then you accidentally send an email to the wrong person, or you send the deed to a house to the wrong person, and that person does not get to keep that house because of your fat finger mistake, then to me, a blockchain solution is not for you. That you should be just looking at a better database developer.
With all due respect, I'm not looking at, I'm just asking for the technical stack. If one does have a use case that meets your criteria, where would it go?
Derek, I see your head shaking up and
I'll
down.
let him answer. I'll let more technical people answer that.
So we have an application on Ethereum, so we don't believe it's.
And maybe we can take this, could you just tell people what Ethereum is for those who are not initiated?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, Ethereum is another blockchain. It enables Ethereum's. The reason why Ethereum got very popular very quickly, it enables smart contracts very quickly and easily. Now Bitcoin allows for smart contracts as well. People found it a little bit easier and quicker to get up and running and to write
It's an
smart
improvement on
contracts.
the algorithm, or it's a new algorithm?
It's easier, I would say, and it didn't have a big block size controversy surrounding whether or not certain things had to happen in order to enable smart contracts or not. So it was able to capitalize on sort of a marketplace to be able to bring smart contracts to life very quickly. They advertise themselves as being Turing complete, and some other advertisements. Again, a lot of these are technology. They're feasible via other blockchains. It's just Ethereum managed to get into that space very quickly. They also have a very quick block time. So,
What about other platforms though besides Ethereum?
so there's Rootstock would be a good example on top of Bitcoin. But to answer, I guess, the question, we've actually found JavaScript, for us, sort of a full JavaScript stack has been the most flexible across multiple kind of platforms for us. The note that knowing what you're trying to actually solve for is exceedingly good, because we get that all the time. We have people who come in and say, we want to build a blockchain solution, and when you track it down, they don't. Well, or they could, but they would lose a lot of money doing so, and we would lose a lot of money, and so it's probably not the best thing to do. But yes, ultimately, the JavaScript stacks for us have been the best place to start and the most flexible.
I just want to respond and say, you don't have to care anything about the use of a currency on a blockchain or any kind of financial transactions to actually make use of what blockchains can do. And the reason I say that, you could put any information on a blockchain. It could be just archiving things that happened, like official government records. They could be commands telling people to do things. So that's what a transaction is. It says, take this action on my behalf. And all a blockchain is, it ties into our very increasingly networked world. And there's a lot of value to pushing data out to users. And there's a lot of value to having live instantaneous updates of that data. And that's what the blockchain does. The blockchain is a way of pushing data out to people so that everyone, you can ensure that everyone gets the same data and they all know if anything's missing, they can come back and pick it up. So it's keeping everyone synchronized to the same data. There's also a process of updating that data, which doesn't have to anymore be just one person doing the updates. You can now have a collaborative effort to update that data. So you could have a consortium of banks, for example, updating data. You could have a group of companies in a supply chain that are maintaining a common database and are collaborating on updating that information. So really, the blockchain enables the ability to push data out to people, to provide assurances that you're getting the right data, to collaboratively manage the process of updating that data, and to have a permanent record of that data for whether it's auditing purposes, archival purposes, whatever have you. All those things are offered by the blockchain without getting involved in currencies at all.
I have to disagree with that. And the reason is because, I'm sorry, Al, but everything you just described, I can do with an Excel spreadsheet as a Google Doc, giving out the permissions to like 8 people that I like. And there is a record of every change that's happened. It's stored on a Google server, which is pretty secured. I doubt Google would pick up my call, and I say, hey, you know, I don't want this guy to have made that change. I don't think they would listen to me. There's a clear record of what time that change was made, who made it. So I don't see that as if that's a blockchain, then we've had this for 30 years.
Well, first of all, if you start linking those together so that you know you didn't miss any updates, so all the updates are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then yeah, you have a blockchain. Exactly. And the other point is that the process you described was very much one organization dictating the information, having a sort of a central point of failure there. If that one organization stops doing the updates, what happens? Well, maybe no more updates happen until they fix their system. So what the blockchain does, it can spread out the responsibility for those updates to a number of different organizations. So if one computer crashes, the other computers that are responsible for these updates can continue working transparently without any glitches in the system.
But in my case, that point of failure is Google, which we haven't seen in 20 years. And and if that happens, you have way bigger problems than your whatever company it is, whatever supply chain it is. If Google fails,
Gmail was down for a whole day this year for some users.
and that was a bigger problem than your individual company. And you can always have your own backup as well.
Okay, hold on, we have two different.
Me? Oh, the value transfer of Bitcoin, which is pushing back on a lot of regulation that has gotten a bit out of control. I see Bitcoin, I mean, people are, what Carol said, well, now that the government has gotten really good at identifying all financial transaction, and they got to sit back and relax and say, we got them. Here comes Bitcoin, right?
You said, Ray, the settlement issue was a regulatory issue.
Yes.
It is not.
It is.
It is the banks wanting to manage that money for 3 days and control, the process and make money off of that. Yes, it's regulatory, but the system used that.
Right, and because of Bitcoin, they're now gonna have to compete with Bitcoin, and that's gonna get removed. I fully expect, because of Bitcoin, I expect gambling to be legalized. Bitcoin will probably help the marijuana get legalized, that's for sure. Maybe a lot of other non-violent crimes. I personally would love to see all money laundering laws go away, because I think money is property, and you should be able to spend money that you earn in any way that you like. I don't see how going after the money takes you backwards into the crime. I think you should be allowed to spend your money any way you like. I also love the use case for Bitcoin because of its transparency. Oh, by the way, so Jonathan mentioned the company, so they're trying to identify the users. All Bitcoin transactions are public, but the users are supposed to be private. If you can identify the users, Bitcoin's useless.
Okay.
But there is transparency for taxes, so that we can see what the government's doing. That's a great use case.
Okay, I can see. We have a couple questions. Do you have a question here?
If we store our data on the blockchain and use that for giving it to other people, we would have to spend something like some ether, let's say Ethereum blockchain, because every time you go to your smart contract on the blockchain, I have to pay for it, right? Right now, I know that Ethereum is not charging, but they have a plan, they're gonna start charging it. They're already charging for it.
Yeah, there's transaction fees
Yeah, so like
similar to
I
Bitcoin.
and most my data or any information on the blockchain, so it's gonna, every time I do the transaction, exchange it with you or somebody, it's gonna cost me so with human exchange, right? Put it on. So that's
Set up your own blockchain.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about that cost is that it actually provides security, right? That's the very interesting thing about blockchain is that yes, the more people that are using it, and those costs and those transaction fees, that actually goes to the people that are getting paid to secure your data are the people that are actually securing your data. And it actually is an interesting, to me it's a very interesting model, as opposed to trusting that Google, trusting that some nameless, faceless person isn't just flipping a switch and selling your data out the back door. It actually allows for a business model where you can see that being secured.
We have one other question right here.
So let me just come back to the comment about someone types in the private key incorrectly, uses a small letter instead of a capital letter, and now the house goes to the wrong person. And I think I heard your comment being, does that person get to keep that house? This may not be for you. Look, mistakes happen, and the law deals with that pretty easily. And the answer is no, he does not get to keep the house. That transaction is either void or voidable. This happens all the time. Blockchain cannot change that.
No, it actually can. The Bitcoin blockchain does change that. I've seen someone accidentally tip a bartender $1 Bitcoin instead of $1 when the Bitcoin was worth $800. So the bartender got an $800 tip. The only reason why that person got $799 back was because we all kind of knew each other, and then the next day this was realized, and the bartender was nice enough to send it back, but they didn't have to, and that's a blockchain.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about gratuity like that. I'm talking about a legally enforceable contract where people have obligations, and mistakes in the execution of contracts happen all the time. I cannot see how blockchain changes that.
We introduced one concept earlier about multi-sig, and there's a whole, as Jonathan said earlier, There's an infrastructure that's being built around this technology. And one element is how do you prevent mistakes happening like that, where you would have then ultimately multiple signatures coming to the table to make sure that that transaction happens the way you want it. We are, I know we've got more questions, but I'd like to invite the other panelists up here now so we can sort of segue into the next piece. As you can see, there's so much. We're just sort of starting to scratch the surface of the issues around this technology. But I'd like to invite Samantha and Jason and Brian up. And is there anybody else that, I think I've got all the panelists. And you're more than welcome to stay up here. Any of those who'd like to stay out and continue the discussion. But we want to move on and talk a little bit more about what's going on in the commercial development stage. And yeah, since we're getting settled here, quickly refresh your drink, grab something to lunch, and return. And okay, so in the interest of time, if you don't mind just keeping your ears open, keep the, you're going to have time at the end to talk, converse a little bit more. But what I'd like to do is, and I'm not quite sure which side to start with, whether we start with Samantha or start with Brian here. Brian, I think maybe you might be a great segue between the last panel and this panel to talk about what your company is doing.
Transactions are multiple. Minimum
the world. Sing me a song.
Especially considering the financial.
So my name is Brian Hoffman. I'm the CEO of OB1, the company that employs most of the developers that work on something called Open Bazaar, which is a decentralized peer-to-peer marketplace similar to eBay, which uses Bitcoin. It eliminates all middlemen, including eBay, and uses Bitcoin to basically reduce the cost of doing business online to zero. And I think one of the interesting ways that this ties into the previous discussion, which is I think one of the original use cases of Bitcoin, which most people consider to be kind of a negative reflection on the technology, is the Silk Road. And if you, like, how many people are familiar with Silk Road? Okay, so pretty much almost everybody. But if you aren't, Silk Road was a dark net marketplace that allowed people to purchase drugs, firearms, information, things like that, that was illegal, completely anonymous, and it basically put Bitcoin on the map. And prove that it actually could be used as a digital currency for value. And it's probably the primary reason why the price of Bitcoin went up so quickly. I doubt it was the 2 pizzas that Laszlo sold originally. But we do something similar, which is the marketplace is completely unregulated. It's global. It uses Bitcoin. It's fairly private at the moment, and getting more private every day. And it's up to the people who participate on the network to decide what is sold, how it's sold, who gets to buy it, and where it's sold. So you could sell anything, anywhere, to anybody else in the world, and nobody can stop you. And you don't get charged to do it, which obviously leads to some interesting morality questions around what's right and what's wrong. Open Bazaar is an open protocol, which we build, but because we have no central authority in the system, there's no way for us to interact or intervene in any case. So it's a pretty fascinating project, and it actually started out just as that, a side project, which actually turned into a company. But
what's your business model?
You sound like my investors. Yeah, so essentially, you know, when you blow up the centralized model, when you look at like an Etsy or an eBay and you say, okay, let's get rid of the business and decentralize it, the need for some of the services that they actually provide doesn't go away. Some of them you can actually emulate using technology and protocols, like the idea of escrow
is something that can be done within a smart contract, right? Like, so when I buy something off of OpenBazaar, I send Bitcoin not to the seller directly and hope that he ships something to me. I send it to an escrow account that we both control. And then when he ships the good to me, then we both agree to release those funds to him. And so Bitcoin enables that. Now there's no need for a payment processor in the middle. But you know, things like buyer protection, reputation, identity vetting, merchant vetting, trust, all these kinds of services are very hard to build on a decentralized platform, at least at the moment. And so there's a lot of opportunities, like a lot of greenfield opportunity for businesses to come in and provide those services on a more ad hoc, optional basis.
Again, that's a double advocate. If you're selling sites or you're selling PCB, you don't want to do it in public.
Certainly. Well, actually, I would disagree with you. The darknet marketplaces have a very strong reputation system. There's something called grams, which is essentially a reputation database for all the marketplaces, tracks all the ratings, reviews. You'd be surprised, thousands of transactions that a single marijuana dealer has, proving that he's trustworthy and will give you a good quality product in 2 days. So, you know, just because you're doing something illegal does not mean that those requirements go away, right? Because you're still doing business. You just may not agree with what that business is. So, yeah.
Should I know I've spoken a little bit, but I haven't actually said what I do. My name is Jonathan Levine. I'm a co-founder of a business called Chainalysis. We provide, as was alluded to on the previous panel, we provide anti-money laundering solutions to Bitcoin businesses and banks who give bank accounts to Bitcoin businesses, essentially allowing Bitcoin businesses to assess the risk of their customers that are using their services to procure Bitcoin. They're required to by law, and we also help law enforcement conduct investigations in Bitcoin.
Thanks. My name is Alex Akery. I'm a managing director and general counsel of a DC area based venture capital firm. So we invest in early stage financial technology companies. One of the areas that we try to make sense of from an investment standpoint is all the logos up here on the screen, and trying to evaluate which of these many of which amazing innovative companies are likely to actually produce financial return, which is obviously our first and foremost goal. So I will say from a financial technology standpoint, I actually think that blockchain is one of the most, if not the only, really truly innovative technology that's being applied to finance right now. A lot of the other things like mobile penetration of cloud computing and stuff like that is all stuff that's been applied elsewhere. So from my perspective, this is one of the most interesting things that I get to spend my time on, and see a ton of promise in the kinds of companies that are emerging today, but definitely still feels like early days.
My name is Samantha Pelosi, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Payments and Innovation at BAT, which stands for the Bankers Association for Finance and Trade. So our members are large global banks that you've been hearing about, especially in doing large value cross-border transactions for businesses between large banks to central banks, etc. It's called correspondent banking, and transactional banking is what we focus on. And so underlying that is, again, these cross-border payments, cash management, treasury functions, as well as international trade. Both the traditional international trade, letter of credit, transactions that are issued by banks, as well as invoice financing, which is a kind of a new supply chain way to finance international trade. Our members are a number of the organizations up here. We not only have large global banks and important regional banks in various jurisdictions around the globe, but we have a growing number of pretty well-known financial technology companies such as IBM. Ripple was a startup. Now I would argue it's not so startup anymore. And then truly startup companies that are smaller companies working in the transaction banking space. Not doing person-to-person payments, but more entity-to-entity payments. I'm a lawyer by background. I worked in private practice. I also was a lawyer for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is the regulator in the US that oversees all of the nation's regulations regarding anti-money laundering. I worked at a large remittance company that did business-to-business remittances cross-border, and I was their head of global compliance, and then I went to the Federal Reserve doing consumer protection as well as payments work. So I can address some of the issues that were raised on the earlier panel. Money laundering is not spending or using money that is yours. By definition, money laundering is using money that was gotten through another crime. It's an ill-gotten gain, so it really isn't yours. And then anything you do with it after that becomes money laundering. Even depositing it into your own bank account, that's money laundering. What else? Consumer protection for Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin and blockchain technology is wonderful. And again, our member organizations have set up an innovation council within BAFT. They're actively exploring how they can use it in their back offices to streamline their processes, how they can use it between each other on a bilateral basis, and how they can set up new payment or trade finance systems between each other. They tend to be not focusing on open source code and open source platforms, but they're building their own proprietary platforms, and you need permission to participate on that platform. I do think it's a fantastic technology that holds a lot of promise. There are quite a few legal and regulatory questions outstanding. And I don't, in my day job, really work on the consumer protection issues, but I did just a few years ago. And it's amazing, and it's great what you can accomplish. It's very volatile, so be careful when you're opening up your account. You buy a Bitcoin, it could be worth $800 tomorrow, then somebody gets hacked, one of the exchanges, and it's down in the toilet at 2. You've just lost $600 if you need to spend those Bitcoin right away. You can fat finger something, and one of the previous speakers is correct. The person who received that Bitcoin that you didn't mean to send them any Bitcoin, they can hold on to it and they don't have to give it back. The consumer protections right now around payments in the United States, it's unclear whether those definitely do or do not apply to Bitcoin transactions. So it's an open question. There are arguments on both sides.
Okay, hello. My name is Jason Dispenza, and I might take this backwards a step. I'm a solution-oriented type of person. So I started in the energy sector 11 years ago, and was aware of Bitcoin in 2009 and 10, and didn't come back to it again until maybe late 2014. But it was in the search for a framework for an enabling technology within the energy space that led me back to what blockchain was. And my view of blockchain is, pardon some metaphors here, and there are companies out there building blocks that you can play with, and there's other companies out there that are assembling blocks in useful ways. So what I see as Bitcoin, or as any other cryptocurrency, that's what's allowing some interoperability between human processes that already exist, or the need to perhaps be in a better database, like we're talking about distributed ledger systems. When you need trust, and when you need to work on a common data set, that is ultimately the most game-changing component, I think, to blockchain. And in my work in the federal space, we're working with the Department of Energy, and we're funneling them our research on how to map the credentials that are in the energy industry, like on both the credentials to install systems, but the credentials to authenticate or inspect Everyone out there has a job, they're doing these jobs, but there's not a common data set which, if you hold this credential, like that your word is good, and that there's no place that if you own data that's been verified by somebody that's got a credential that you can compete it, or that you can sell it, or that you can market it, or that you can exchange it for someone else's data, or that you can, one day assemble that data into even more complex algorithms like credits, and solar credits, and efficiency credits, and a lot of other carbon farming credits is what my work at E2F2.us is exploring. And then more recently, I started a new company, Souls.io, which is working on an interoperability engine, looking at how crowdfunding mechanisms might be made better with blockchain.
Derek Tiffany, as alluded to earlier, I build stuff. Specifically, we built a marketplace, essentially an ATS on top of Ethereum, although right now there's only one security listed. That is very intentional, one and only one. Security, however, it could, in theory, be applied to the DAO and other token and securities and ICOs that are currently coming out on Ethereum. That's it.
I think we need to, well, separate. You've heard a lot of different things up here right now, so I'm assuming that many of you are like, what's going on? To sort of sort out, at least in my own mind, several things that we've heard. One is the Open Bazaar model, where you are taking advantage of this technology to allow people to conduct transactions, sort of melding the best of Bitcoin from a transactional standpoint and a certain level of anonymity. Samantha, you're on the other end with working with, as you said, the nation's largest financial institutions, as they're looking at and trying to figure out where their place is going to be in this world, how they're going to use that technology internally, and they're also struggling, and I think, Jonathan, you could probably talk to this point, is they're struggling with how to reach out to their customers who want to interact with Brian's company. And then I guess, Alex, we've got you in the sort of the middle, figuring out, as you said, which of these ventures are you going to put where are you going to place your bets as we're going forward? Jason and then Derek, you've just introduced some new concepts of how this technology is being used for fundraising in our securities markets, and a whole new concept of crowdfunding in this area. So I don't know whether to have a vote of the audience to say where do we go next on this, but hopefully that helps you sort out a little bit of what you've heard. I'd like to sort of jump right now, and Jonathan, I know you have some slides, whether this is the right time for those slides, but I think having heard Brian's presentation, and I know you're interacting with banks as well, is how do you bridge that gap between Brian's business model and Samantha's members?
We should call you a pitcher instead of a moderator. This is really easy. I'm going to do a live demo from a computer because we have software that's in the market. Are we online? Awesome. Cool. For those that are unfamiliar, this is what not to do in a university hall presentation. Do a live demo. Cool. Awesome. This is chain analysis. This is our user interface. And essentially what I'm looking at is actually the view of an exchange who's wanting to understand the risk of all of their customers. You'll see there's a traffic light color scheme going down on the right hand side, and this shows you how risky each one of these customers is. And this is based on Chainalysis' research on identifying high-risk entities on the Bitcoin blockchain.
And can I interject here?
Sure.
Is that the exchange? If you think about when you go to, you're getting ready to get on a plane to go to Europe, and you want some euros, what do? You go to a currency exchanger at the airport, or maybe you've done it at your bank ahead of time. That kind of infrastructure exists in the Bitcoin world, and this is the kind of client that you're talking about. That's the kind of client that one has to go to get the Bitcoin to be able to do business on OpenBazaar, correct? And at the same time, Samantha's members have their customers who need to transfer money to the exchanger so they can get the Bitcoin so they can go buy something on OpenBazaar. Hopefully that helps you all.
Yeah, I mean, I could even be a store on OpenBazaar who wanted to check like the provenance or destination of people who were using my store. So this could be used by anyone who comes under sort of financial service regulation that has a responsibility to check source or destination of funds. So in this case, I'd say that most of our clients who use this are Bitcoin exchanges that allow the purchase or sale of Bitcoins using their platform. And essentially, what you see here is a list of my customers and how high risk they are. And what this is based on is our sort of more enhanced due diligence tool. It's good that alerts pop up. It makes me feel like I'm really risking it. So essentially what this shows is a single customer, and I can track sort of where they're sending their money. This is an individual customer who sent 100% of their money to the Silk Road marketplace. And I can see that here, where essentially this is my customer, and in this transaction that was announced to the Bitcoin blockchain, money was sent from my exchange to Mt. Gox. To Silk Road Marketplace, and you can see the money is actually going from Mt. Gox in this instance to the Silk Road Marketplace. And so Silk Road and Mt. Gox are both labeled by Chainalysis. This is the research that our analysts do. If I was Mark Copeles, which I'm not, I would think about filing a suspicious activity report in this case, because this is a customer who's abusing my terms of service and is probably conducting potentially suspicious activity. So this is all the information that I would need to file at FinCEN, and then the law enforcement agencies actually also have access to exactly the same data and can go and investigate what they want to do with them. So that's a really short glimpse into how exchanges can prioritize what type of customers they want to continue doing business with and what customers they don't want to continue doing business with. And that is how we marry up like small startups with financial institutions, is that they can prove that they have good processes to monitor illicit flows, and banks can actually independently monitor those businesses about those flows and make sure that they are telling the truth, unlike traditional methods which rely more on self-reported data than in this particular instance. And also, it's integrated so that law enforcement can actually also act upon the information that's provided from them instead of requesting more information. So the whole essence of Bitcoin being a distributed, decentralized blockchain can also be used to connect up all the different players through using tools like Chainalysis. So that's the idea.
So we have here an example of one taking a concept from this new technology and developing a business out of it, but at the same time also creating an important tool that's going to help the infrastructure develop further. And I think getting the regulators, and Samantha, certainly from your perspective at FinCEN and at the Fed, getting the regulators more comfortable with how the banks can monitor this activity will help significantly. I guess, Brian, though, from your perspective, what's your view of this kind of a tool?
So I guess
one might think that I would not be happy about something like that. I think, you know, my perspective is there's kind of two worlds. There's just like the underlying protocol, which is a completely free and open network. Same with Bitcoin. You can use Bitcoin however you want. But I think where it changes a little bit is when you decide to build a centralized business on top of that. And then obviously knowing your customers as that business starts to incur regulations, right? Regulatory risk, because you actually have an address that exists and someone has to come and check you, or you pay taxes and all this other stuff. So for instance, my business OB1, I think I kind of maybe left you thinking that I would do reputation and trust services for drug dealers. That's not the case, right? Like, my business exists here in the US, and I'm beholden to US regulations and laws. And so most likely we could use a service like Chainalysis to, like you said, to any merchants that we work with, do these kinds of activities and file reports or do whatever we need to do.
Can I ask a question to both of you guys? And I apologize, I'm not taking my question. How is that data, how do you get that data? Is it embedded in the blockchain that you receive when a transaction occurs, or are you pulling data from servers? How do you build that topology?
Yeah. Yeah. So essentially, you'll see that the labels in there are entities rather than individuals. The reason that is that what we do is we do two things. We design algorithms that go through the public data set and identify which transactions were done by the same entity. That's basically a data problem. You have all the public transactions. They have different styles. There are different structures that give away bits of information about them. The easiest example to understand is that if you have a transaction where you have multiple inputs into a transaction, Bitcoin works inputs and outputs rather than an account-based system. So if you have multiple inputs, you can tie all the identifiers who contribute inputs to that transaction together, because they have to all sign the transaction together. So there are heuristics like that. There are other types of heuristics that you can use to build now what you would call an entity graph. And then you need to try and attribute real-world identities into that entity graph. And what Chainalysis do is essentially actively transact on the network. I open accounts at all different services. I make deposits and withdrawals from those services, so I can learn code.
Now, that doesn't mean that his life is not going to get harder as time goes on, because the core developers of Bitcoin and the other blockchains are actively working to make it more private and more anonymous every day.
Where's Alan?
Yeah, and so, I think these kinds of techniques are going to be great, but maybe not elucidate the entire activity that is occurring on some of these blockchains if they are able to achieve some of the anonymity, like Zcash and things like that. Now, he'll probably say that he has techniques or whatever, but it's a cat and mouse game, I think, that's going to continue for a long time.
The arms race?
So I think we are. I'm less secretive about what we do. I think we, are fairly well known in the space. For me, it's not necessarily a cat and mouse game, and that is because there are certain ways in which I think adoption of a more transparent blockchain is preferable in some instances versus other instances. There are pretty good techniques, as I sort of alluded to remain very anonymous in Bitcoin, that I'm not sure going sometimes the extra mile to adopt something that is definitely completely private affords you. And so I think that the cat and mouse game is a little bit complicated because some of the transparency that Bitcoin affords allows it to be closely connected actually to the existing financial system. And some of those other systems may not be able to connect as easily to the financial system. For people that haven't tried to run a Bitcoin exchange and open a bank account in the US, and Carol can kind of give a speech on this, is that it's not an easy task to manage a banking relationship in this space because there are risks that people don't understand. That's become easier as people have understood how transparent Bitcoin is. it may not be as easy with something that is totally anonymous.
Yeah, I think.
As well, because I'm thinking that's a good example to show one person doing it so great. But if I'm a business and I've got a couple hundred vendors I'm dealing with,
So I give you a risk score on each of your customers, and you can basically work through it. You can prioritize.
you can set alerts and
Yeah.
rules, and they run automated.
A lot of it could become like a Nielsen IRI.
Yeah. So, sorry, I'll repeat both questions. One question is, how scalable is it? So I showed an example of an individual customer that sent money from my service to Silk Road. How do I manage my 1.7 billion Facebook users? So the way that you do that is essentially you have all the data about the activities that these customers are doing, and you can basically assign a risk score and then set priorities on and thresholds and rules and scenarios on what you want to look at. There's also regulatory guidance about certain dollar values that you need to file on and stuff like that to help you out. The second question is about data syndication and aggregation. Essentially, I see myself as, and we see our business as providing like a layer of providing scalable analytics and mapping in the blockchain space, not definitely a anti-money laundering company. We are able to extract a huge amount of intelligence from the way different Bitcoin addresses interact, but that could be for non-financial use cases, it could be for content, it could be for anything. And yes, we do essentially provide an element of that in our existing business.
Can I put you in perspective on the aggregation discussion? So we put a lot of focus on Bitcoin, which is big, it's cool, but Bitcoin is a blockchain, and he is an analytics company looking at a public blockchain. Okay, but there are many other industries where blockchain becomes very interesting technology. And so at a federated level, or at a commercial level, or when several commercial entities syndicate together, like health insurers, to create a larger network of commercial, you're going to have space for data analytics companies to do what they do already, which analyze the data. So we're all working on a common data set versus definitely different siloed, very fractured market data sets.
Do you actually think that blockchains will lead to more fragmented marketplaces?
No. What's the mathematical comparison of going from 0 to 1? How do you multiply a number by 0 and get to 1? That's the difference between where our society is today with how interoperable we're going to become soon. It's just untold.
I would say that we're going to see a few succeed and a lot go away.
But I'm talking more along the lines, so we're talking about Bitcoin, we're talking about health exchanges getting together and having their own blockchains, we're talking about different things. So, and I assume that, over time, there could be fragmentation, even though blockchain gets better as more people use it.
Well, it'll be a very frothy area of companies coming and going. The differences between a cryptocurrency being launched by a company versus a new set of blocks to play with by a different company versus those that are implementing solutions off of different blocks out there. There's plenty of space for all of these things to evolve. However, the blockchain as a larger idea is a human-enabling technology. The currencies are somewhat the interoperability, in between private and syndicated blockchains. When you reach an answer in someone's blockchain, or when you're trying to steam yourself, to the top of some social group, and you get there, is that data valuable to you in that group, or is that data transferable to other blockchain zones? And then that's where true interoperability across societal pillars will evolve from. It's a long ways off from where we are today. We're still struggling to figure out where the first points of light of blockchain are in each industry. And the healthcare conference last 2 weeks ago in Nashville, they're further ahead, I think, than most industries. That industry is crying for blockchain because apparently 300 or more people touch an average claim. wonder why it's so expensive. And in healthcare, that blockchain may come to grandma in as much as she checks into her doctor's office by putting a QR code on her phone, and the doctor scans it, just like she checks in for a flight. So it'll be very subtle for people. Blockchain will be here, and it will evolve with us without having anyone really need to understand it, which is kind of weird.
Samantha, can you tell us more of what's going on in the banking industry? We've seen more money go into efforts to deal with these issues in the banking industry than any other sector of the economy.
Yeah, so I somewhat agree with actually what you're saying. I think we're maybe 2 years off before these enterprise blockchains really get going, and there is going to be a little bit of fragmentation because everyone is vying to be the IT platform. So we have, as a member, R3, which is, again, many of our members currently that are the largest global banks around the world. They're all looking at transaction banking solutions. So again, trade finance and payments. Then there's Ripple. They've had a lot of proof of concepts out there about cross-border payments. And then there's IBM, Hyperledger, Linux, who are also standing up their own platform. And then all of these groups are also working on standards, business rules for how to use their platform, also technology standards for how you code things onto their platform. So there may be some fragmentation at first, but I think all of these platforms have an eye on the future, and they know that interoperability is going to be key. Not only interoperability amongst different blockchains, but also interoperability with legacy systems. So I was talking to somebody earlier today, this evening, and one of the problems with the payments use case is that right now we have Bitcoin, which is a virtual currency, and it does have value. Some people say it doesn't have any value, but it does have value. It has the value that people place on it. And it has the value according to supply and demand also, because there's a finite number that can be mined in X amount of years. So it does have value, but it's not issued or backed by a government. So it's not a US dollar that is widely accepted and that is issued by governments and that is a store of value. So there's a clunkiness with the payments because if you're going to be using these on a wide scale use between large banks and banking, sure, they can use Bitcoin, they can use their own token on their own private system that they all agree has a certain value. But the minute somebody wants to transfer it into fiat currency, there has to be some interface with a blockchain system and then the normal system, an exchange or something. And that's where it gets clunky and breaks down. There's a really good report that I would recommend to all of you for these enterprise use cases. So in insurance, in voting, in financial services, securities, post-trading, payments, international finance, and international trade. It's the World Economic Forum, and the title is something like how blockchain will change the world or transform financial services. It came out in, I think, August. And it can kind of take you through all of the enterprise use cases. So as you mentioned, there are use cases that are kind of moving out in front of the pack. And I actually think that, unfortunately, I love payments, and I don't think payments is one of them. There are places in our economy and the global economy that are really heavy lifts right now. Trade finance is one of them. It is ridiculous. There are paper systems that you can't get your money unless you literally show somebody paper. And you can't get money out of a system. You can't be paid for your goods. So I think some of those use cases will go first, and it will also, because of the distributed nature of the blockchain, all of the folks that are involved in some kind of a financial international trade transaction will have visibility on where the goods are, who's signed off on them, what the container ship actually contains, has it gotten through export control or not, customs or not, where it is, when are you going to actually get your money. And so the checks can be monitored along the way, and hopefully there'll be better visibility, better utilization of the cash. There won't be as much money just stuck in the ether for a month before you can collect. You can have your goods delivered and collect on the money that you're owed as the vendor. Also in the trading of securities, post-trade settlement is also an area that's very paper intensive and that I think is going to take off very quickly. Insurance, any kind of insurance is another area where you can have like your crowdsourcing kind of pooling to buy insurance, but then also to act on insurance claims. And it is the nature of the technology in that it's encrypted and secured, and all records are updated at multiple points that make it really attractive to large enterprises conducting international business or national business because it's instantaneous. There isn't a single point of failure. If the building burns down or the computer crashes, there are still records that are secure and reliable to move forward with.
I was going to add one more quick thing. Yeah, I think you're exactly right on the finance trade topic around supply chains and stuff. I was at BNP a couple weeks ago, and they're already doing a pilot to make sure that the goods are not going into non-OFAC countries and things like that. So that's actually happening now. But my prediction here is that we're going to start to see some consolidation in two areas. One, where you're kind of talking about where the banks are doing kind of interbank stuff and forming these consortiums like R3 and stuff. And I think that's going to stop being called blockchain. And I think in the next year or so, we're going to see them stop calling that blockchain. I mean, we already see Digital Asset Holdings, Applied Masters won't even say the word blockchain or Bitcoin. She calls it a ledger. And I think it's going to push in that direction to separate and differentiate itself. And blockchain on the consumer side is going to remain kind of more like where I think we're playing a little bit, and the exchanges and that side. So I think that's what's probably going to happen in the next year or two. But yeah, I just want to add.
So I'd like to turn to Jason and then we'll get to Alex, because he's going to give us the overall view of all this. But I remember about 3 years ago, I had a 24-year-old walk into my office with his laptop, open it up, and show me what he had developed using, if not Bitcoin, one of the altcoins. And what I saw instantly was it looked like a high-performing securities exchange platform. And when I had to break the news to him, well, you still have to comply with the securities laws and be a registered exchange if you're going to run this technology. He sort of folded up his computer and disappeared. But we've seen a lot of innovation already in the securities industry. And Derek, you're talking a little bit more traditional securities industry, and Jason, you sort of touched on a subject we need to talk a little bit more about, which is the crowdfunding. So Derek, can you tell us a little bit more? First of all, what is AST?
Well, alternate trading system, if my memory serves. I mean, our product came about, we did actually file with the SEC, not we, someone who hired us, did file with the SEC to be a security. And they basically had a concept of both a security and a rewards token. So how they were trying to raise capital was sort of a combination.
So they registered something with the SEC as a security. We also have Overstock.
However, right, yes, so there is Overstock.
Overstock, through a series of several efforts, registered an exchange and also was able to register securities to issue on the exchange.
Now, SEC actually came back to us and said, no, you're not a security, you're a cryptocurrency. And so we said, okay. I think that was halfway to our project, so we had to make some accommodations. But yes, it has been very, from a technology standpoint, certainly very interesting to see, yes, requirements change very quickly. Legal and lawyers change exceedingly quickly, sort of as you're midstream in development. And we certainly have had to do that kind of multiple times. Right now, yes, technically we are regulated as a cryptocurrency. Now that is part of the reason why we only have one security on our exchange. And so I know they are exploring how to then open that up to other securities, yes.
What is the exchange called?
GX coin, great coin. It's been about.
Can I ask you a question? If you're gonna trade securities, do you have to be a registered broker then?
Again, since right now it is as cryptocurrency, so the SEC is keeping track of when those exchanges happen, and basically who gets seeded those coins, who gets funded those coins, and then ultimately the money that comes out. Now, I don't think, no, we're not registered as a broker except in California.
If
that
you're
is
not
going on.
registered as a broker under the securities laws, are you considered an exchanger, any MSB and potentially a state licensable exchange?
Under
Money transmitter statutes?
That I don't know.
You can
So,
see the complexities
yes.
of the issues that we have to
I know we have a lot of OFAC stories in our backlog, and it's basically to make that, apparently the reports that come out are from our administrators, not easily read. So we're constantly improving that. No, as far as some of the detailed regulatory, I do not know background on that.
I guess I'd like to take a quick related tangent before coming back to crowdfunding and the SEC, oversight of cryptocurrencies. This diagram behind us, again, is complicated as it can get, right? But in my view, this is just one thing. Okay, this is Bitcoin, and as we start looking at agriculture or at energy in general, or at the energy grid versus the retrofit markets, there's nuances, out there within our society, right? And as you find, societal use case that would benefit from working off of a common data set, but then sometimes there is a coin or a token or something that would go into that system that would help that system become more proliferated faster, or perhaps attract users. And actually go back to the sort of question you'd asked a second ago. This diagram, as complicated as it looks, that's just about Bitcoin, and that diagram hasn't happened yet for energy. It hasn't happened yet for health. It hasn't happened yet for agriculture. So yes, there is going to be some fracturing, and then we'll bubble back into some winners and losers. But as far as my view of tokenization goes, our exploration with tokens at e2f2.us was really trying to figure out how we can connect carbon credit markets to unrelated industries. So when you weatherize a home, you make its indoor air and its water purer, so that physically the next 100 years of occupants in that home don't have some very basic diseases or don't develop chronic things. There's huge value there. That's preventative care money that would be better suited paying $4,000 to weatherize a kid's home than see that kid end up in the hospital 8 times from asthma, totaling $400 grand. So how do you connect that money? Where does Volkswagen's $5 billion fine go? Is it coming into any of our industries yet? Is it trackable? And is there some way to transparently reassemble that $1 billion that got earmarked for energy or for the EPA or for whoever else? So coming back to the tokenization question here, I guess the question is why do you need a token? Or going back to Tone's, Bayes' question, why do you need a blockchain, right? You need a blockchain, for certain reasons. And then the SEC is going to tell you that if those reasons involve the future value of those tokens, if you're trading derivatives off of those tokens, if suddenly those tokens are doing way more exotic things than just some basic use cases, then you definitely go into needing to know your customers, or needing to make sure anti-money laundering things aren't happening, or making sure that you're not sending money to foreign countries. But if you're in a little private school that wants to get alumni involved, and you want to use a private token or a blockchain to tokenize that, there's no reason not to in some cases, but you only should if everyone that's in that system cares enough about trust or is big enough to say we don't trust the entity that's giving it to us.
public company, Wells Fargo, just had how many employees like trying to fraud their own clients' accounts. So maybe we don't want Wells Fargo to manage their own, gamified, loan officer rep engine. Like maybe that needs to be open. So there's lots of thought experiments happening now with when do you need a token or when do you need a blockchain, and when does that blockchain connect to distributed hash ledger system, which is an inside-out database. It's a different database.
Okay, I've promised Alex some time here. And Alex, you're an important piece of this whole picture because you're the money to help make a lot of these things happen.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. No, I think this has been really interesting from my perspective, and actually I agree with very much of what's said, and I love spending time with folks like this because just the technical depth on all the stuff that's going on is really informative for us. From our perspective, our investors obviously have entrusted us with their money to try to identify those participants and innovators within various segments of the fintech space, including blockchain, that are going to be successful. And I think where we are, I couldn't agree more actually with the comment that was made a little bit earlier about where we are. There really is, in my view, this fracturing, this competition among standards, among use cases right now. It's not at all unusual, I don't think, in light of kind of how novel this technology is, and indeed, I think if it were anything other than this, it would be a little bit surprising to me. But I think, I thought I might just give a perspective on how, at least us, as one investor in the market, tries to make decisions about, what kinds of companies we want to back. At a high level, we generally, look at 5 different characteristics in companies. One is the team, right? So a lot of this is kind of like, yeah, obviously, but the team, the size of the market that they're trying to tackle, what kind of competitive advantages we perceive the business to have, what are the information that we can, that the team has, or justification that they have in terms of unit economics. And then the last thing is kind of outcome. What are the outcomes for the stakeholders that the company serves? I think the easiest one of those 5, when I think about the different, and it's so hard because there's so many different companies that are in this space, but just again, this is a major generalization. But on the outcome side, I think the outcomes here, leaving aside the nefarious actors, right, are really to reduce friction, reduce cost. In my mind, this is a pretty clear kind of case, for investing in the different kinds of companies here, because it's it's I think good in general for society to reduce costs like that, and intermediaries and whatnot. I think one I think that's been really challenging is the unit economics side. Finding companies that have a clear case on how they're going to actually make revenue has been I think a really tough sell for us internally, and we're very focused very focused on that. So I think that's a tough one. Same with competitive advantage, and this gets to the fragmentation and a lot of the frothiness in the market. Which companies are going to have those standards that are going to stand the test of time, and I think it's really hard to say right now. I think we're starting to see some early winners, and that's interesting. It's great that we are. And the other 2 pieces, I think that leaves me with the 2 pieces I think are most important, because I think we're really, for most of the companies in this space, not all, but most, we're at product market fit stage. Everyone likes to talk about product market fit, and I think we are a lot of businesses not yet seeing the product market fit, the use cases that are going to generate real revenues and profits, obviously. And so that gets to 2 things, which is team and market. How strong is this team that's going after the problems that the company's out to tackle, and how big is the market segment that they're really going after? The good news is, as we've talked about, is that the market for a lot of these things is just massive, right? And so trying to identify those teams that are really going to figure it out is, I think, the key. And when you see those, there are some examples, and I don't need to mention them, but those teams that have really raised a lot of capital in the blockchain space, I think really have those 2 things really going for them.
That's a really good place. We have a hard stop in about 3 minutes, but I think leaving us with the concept this is a really massive opportunity out there, I don't think could be a better place to stop. I would like, though, if any of our panelists have a 20-second wrap-up. Can
point about the investment in space. It was a really hot area last year, and it's still continuing. A lot of money's been raised. Haven't quite seen a huge, unicorn, so to speak, come out of the space yet, but I think that's going to come soon. But this is going to be a long haul technology. It's not something that is very simple and that the mainstream is just going to pick up tomorrow, like Pokemon Go. It's going to be, it's going to have to permeate into our culture, and the paradigm shift has to happen in our minds, and for us to wrap our heads around all this before it really takes off. But the promise is here, and obviously from all these dreams that people are having and building businesses off of, it's almost like the beginning of the internet. You're just seeing this amazing influx of like creativity and talent, and it's going to come, something's going to come out of it, and that's I think why we're all here.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I think I'd echo those statements. I'd also definitely go and check out Open Bazaar as like one of the most like innovative products that's out there, like in the market that you can tangibly feel. I know I did a live demo. We have product in the market. People are looking to understand like the potential of this technology. I think it is important, especially in the decentralized. You can see very much in like the decentralized public ledgers, people building products that you can touch and feel as consumers and as business people. I encourage you to go out and like play with them and experiment with them. Yeah, I think the way that I look at the market today is that we build products that drive real revenue today. We're a SaaS business, building a team and building a reputation in the space to then see what are the massive opportunities that will take some time to realize in the future.
Samantha?
I just talked for a long time, but I would say just the one thing, one last thing is that a company, Chainalysis is a great example of I think companies that are that are coming into the blockchain space and helping to provide more trust in the system, which I think will lay the groundwork for a lot of hopefully future innovation.
I think that there's a lot of work going and a lot of money going into this space. There'll have to be some baseline, development of the platform. There are other, especially for financial transactions, other things that will need to be solved at the base level or at the second layer before all of the solutions can be built on top of the platform for different use cases. So again, another shout out for Chainalysis. So identity, digital identity, digitization of assets and legal recognition of those digital assets are going to be very important. Anti-money laundering for screening transactions, any kind of financial transaction, and ultimate settlement for a financial transaction is also going to be very important. Several central banks around the world are looking into possibly issuing fiat currency in digital form so that the last leg of any financial transaction happens when the transfer happens. Because in, again, the transaction banking world, this technology has the ability to take away the middleman and really reduce costs and reduce the time of getting a transaction from endpoint to endpoint.
We're going to turn our microphones off in a second.
Okay, so real quick, the work that Brian and Jonathan are doing, to put it in context for everybody, again, that Bitcoin itself and having a digital escrow between data packets or having a way to analyze blockchains, this is cutting edge stuff, right? And they're working primarily on a Bitcoin blockchain, but there are those of us who are in blockchain tech and related distributed hash ledger tech that Bitcoin's a very small part of what we do. It's good to focus perhaps on any people that are entering into the space, is to look at what data packets are highly frequently traded. And right now we've talked a lot tonight about settlements, and that data is so small. You're talking about a number of two parties. But what about all the data sets that drive health, or that drive, like an audit of something, that cut lots of data that is in some sort of standardized data packet language now, and it's those industries that can be made more interoperable by, instead of storing that stuff separately, to view data, as more of a common set instead of as a toxic asset. That if you're a single entity and you're a big target on you and you have someone's private data, that suddenly you have a big liability that you could face if you lose it. So maybe you don't need it anymore. And the fabric of like who we are society-wise is ready to change because you get to have control of your own data for the first time.
Yes, that control of your own data, the distributed, decentralized nature is extremely powerful. It's something that once you see in practice, it's really hard to imagine not having in the future.
Well, I'd like to thank our panelists, both the first and the second set. We clearly didn't get to the government piece, and as you can see, we've just introduced a whole host of topics for further exploration. We thank you for being a great audience tonight and look forward to further conversations on this subject. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you all very much for your patience and for being here. Special thanks to Carol and the panelists. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your expertise in sharing this new technology with us. All of you have a survey on your seats. Please take 2 minutes. It's 7 questions. Fill it out right now. You can leave it on your seat if you want, or in the back of the room. Nick will collect them. He's against the wall. Fill it out. You do not have to leave. We still have drinks, and you can mingle and talk to the panelists and one another. We have the room till 9, so if you want to stay and talk a little bit more and help yourself to a drink, please do. But please do fill out the surveys. It helps us improve our events. Stay tuned. We have more events coming over the coming months. It'll be probably after the new year, but we have more great events coming. We hope you will attend again. And so thank you all very much for coming.
Where do you go? And we have to use that ability